second session of this faculty development program on advances in civil and structural engineering. For this session, we have resource person, Professor Putul Haldar from Indian Institute of Technology. Area is in seismic vulnerability and risk evaluation of structures, seismic evaluation and retrofitting of structures, performance-based design of structure, non-linear modeling and analysis of structure, structural engineering, and dynamics. Professor Putul is a young faculty in IIT Ropar. IIT Ropar is also youngest one IIT. She has joined IIT Ropar in July 2016, and before that, she was adjunct faculty in National Center of Disaster Mitigation and Management at Malawi National Institute of Technology, Jaipur. Professor Putul has published various research papers in peer-reviewed international journals as well as international conferences. She has worked in the different capacity and handled the different research projects and consultancy of state government, central government, as well as local bodies. She has also principal PI and co-PI for the different Department of Science and Technology projects. She has handled a consultancy project of CPWD, State Public Works Department, as well as private sector. Putul ma'am, I welcome you on behalf of Department of Civil Engineering, Government Engineering College Karad, and Department of Applied Mechanics, Government Engineering College Nagpur for this faculty development program.
Thank you so much, sir.
Now I request Professor Putul, please proceed the session. Ma'am, please, you can share the screen.
Sure. Hello, everyone.
Yes, it is visible.
Very good afternoon. I'm very glad and I'm very thankful for inviting me for this talk. And I understand it's after lunch. It will be very difficult to wake oneself up, but it's promised from my side that what topic I am going to talk about, actually we are going to discuss about, you cannot sleep. It is the topic which we will encounter in everyday's life as being civil engineer, as being a designer, as being the proof checker, as being the teacher. So let's start. Today I'm going to talk about seismic vulnerability and risk assessment of infill frame building. First, I will briefly talk about what is seismic risk. Why do we need to follow this seismic risk assessment at all? And then if we are actually convinced that we need to perform seismic risk assessment of the structures, then what are the components, how to do them? And then what is at our hand which can actually reduce risk assessment by and large? And that part would be your take home today. Okay, so I will start one by one. And I'm really glad to see so many of you, so many learned person, and I will not like to lose the opportunity of having so many learned people with me today to spread the awareness so that we can actually reduce the seismic risk in the environment. These photos are actually very old enough, but these are very close to my heart. I was a first year engineering student when this Bhuj earthquake happened. And I saw these pictures, and another picture, I couldn't dare to put it here. There was one broken door only. Nothing remains as home. and one child was playing around that door, and the caption of that photographs was uh, home is where heart is. And I cannot tell you, at that time when I was first year student, tears rolled down from my eyes, and I was like, can't we do anything to reduce this at that time? And thankfully I have followed my dreams, and little bit I am happy that I can contribute in this fraternity to reduce these things, the sufferings of human being, for a better environment. And I hope we all will contribute in our own limited capacity. This photographs, the first very photograph is actually of masonry structure, and after which we can see it's only rubbles. There is nothing remain. The next photograph is of RC buildings. So there is huge damage. It cannot be, it is not usable anymore. But there is not complete destruction of, because of its strength, and we by our intuition we know that RC structure will be stronger enough than the masonry structure. It's our intuition. We have seen from years, and now I will talk about what makes it stiffer and stronger. These two photographs also are of high-rise multi-story apartments, and you can see the left one, the collapse of Takshila apartment. Those were identical twin towers, but one has, the ground floor has completely gone down, so it loses complete one story, but there was not complete collapse. And the right side, you can see there is an overturning kind of moment, and it actually overturned in the front face. Why this happened, I will discuss. So after looking at this, the very question in my mind which came, why did it happen? What can I do? So later I came to know this is called seismic risk assessment. Why do we do seismic risk assessment? Seismic risk assessment is to actually quantify what is the loss in terms of economic loss and life loss, or even the damage or severity of the human being that is going to happen for a particular level of earthquake, or let me tell that, ground shaking. Why do we need to understand, quantify? Just to prepare for the worst. How can I help? How can I reach out to the people if such kind of things happen? And you know that 80% Indian land are seismically vulnerable, and India is one of the most seismically active region of the whole world. So people who love to study earthquake, they come to India. So quantification is for long time and short term mitigation policy. And there are so many, for important building, there are insurance companies. So they need to know the risk beforehand. They give the insurance. It's like our car insurance and so on. So that's why we need to quantify the amount of losses, which we call seismic risk, in terms of economic loss and life loss, for mitigation policies. Okay. Now, seismic risk is a combination of three different functions. What are those? Seismic hazard, seismic vulnerability, and exposure. It's a combination of these three functions. Now, one by one, I will explain what is seismic hazard, how we can quantify. As a civil engineer, we need not only to understand what is two participant raised hand. What happened? If you have any question, you can actually write in the chat box. I will take up your questions in between. And as I said, it is not any lecture. It is an interactive session. You can actually write down your questions and queries. I will get to know. Rajan will tell us. Okay. So seismic risk has three main components, three functions. Seismic hazard. And as I say, we not only need to understand what is it, but how to quantify. Because ultimately, as a structural engineer, we need to quantify the forces or displacement, and finally the cost. That is what we can do. So seismic hazard is nothing but the expected level of ground checking. Seismic hazard has nothing to do individually to the seismic risk or seismic vulnerability. Seismic risk is innocent quantity. It is just talking about the expected level of ground shaking at any particular location at any particular given time. Like in 200 years or 250 years, the probability of peak ground acceleration at Roorkee is 0.24 G. That is actually talking about the serviceability earthquake. Or in 456 years, it is 0.24 G. That means design basis earthquake. So when we are actually talking about seismic hazard, the location and the duration is also important. And what seismic hazard is, again, the function of magnitude. It's very clear. If magnitude is very high, that energy released during the earthquake is very high, so ground shaking will be severe. The distance at which is the origin of the earthquake. If it is very near to the surface of the earth, then seismic hazard will be higher, obviously. Path to local site condition, the origin and my building. If this path is situated with some very soft soil which is amplifying the ground motion, then my structure is going to have higher seismic hazard, higher ground vibration. So seismic hazard is actually function of this, mainly these three functions, which is magnitude, distance, and source to site path condition, which we also call local site conditions. How do we represent seismic hazard? We can do this photograph of design response spectrum. It's very known to all of us. It's giving the peak response of a single degree of freedom system under the earthquake excitation, numbers of earthquake excitation, and then it has been smoothened using some statistical analysis, so that in design office we are it's very easy to design for the maximum acceleration. Why we are interested only in acceleration as structural engineer? Although seismologists are very much interested in the fault size, length, magnitude, but as structural engineer, we are very much interested in acceleration. The very reason is, we always, being structural engineer, we want to know how much is the external load that is coming to my structure. And the stress caused by the external load should be less than the internal capacity of the member. Then my structure is safe. So during earthquake is not a force. Earthquake only vibrates the ground, because on the ground my foundation is laid. When the ground moves, since it is firmly clipped with the ground, the foundation also start moving and there is a disturbance. So if there is a disturbance, as per the Newton's law, it will want to remain in the state in which it is. So it will try to be in the steady state. So it will try to oppose this disturbance which started due to ground shaking. And to do that, it creates inertia force. Inertia force is nothing but the mass time acceleration. Mass is the mass of the structure, and acceleration is the acceleration in which the ground is vibrating. That's why we are interested in acceleration. But the ground vibration can be represented by velocity, displacement, or acceleration. So it's clear why we are interested only in acceleration. And that's why design response spectrum, mostly we structural engineer plot in terms of acceleration response spectrum. So this is the easiest way. Now for complex structure, very high-rise structure, we cannot actually rely upon this design response spectrum, and we have to analyze the structure as 3D frame buildings and with actual to and fro motion of the ground, which is the dynamics of the ground, which we call time history. Time history, or sometimes we call it signature also, earthquake signature, as earthquake cannot repeat itself twice. Any earthquake, you take up any earthquake, this time versus acceleration or time versus the response quantity will never repeat itself. That's why it is also called the seismic signature. So it has dynamic properties of the earthquake. Or very recently in 2010, people are trying to create the probabilistic seismic hazard map. So these are three main way in which we can express the seismic hazard. Actually, first I explained what is seismic hazard. Now I am trying to take you to the quantification part of this seismic hazard. But historically, seismic hazard was not represented because there was no instrumentation, good instrumentation that can give us this quantities very correctly. So historical way of representing seismic hazard is the seismic intensity. And how they did it after earthquake occurs, a team, a group visit the site and nearby and try to see three things. First, how the people, how they felt. Some of them will tell you that I didn't feel anything. Some of you will tell you, oh, it was so violent that I have to come out from my home. So what is the expression of the people? That's why it's very subjective. So we cannot take only one human response by one person. So we have to be, the group has to be consist of number of people who are interviewing, number of people. The first one is we try to find out the response of the local people. And then we try to see the response of the objects like TV set, or since these are derived in European country, so there was chimney is another very important thing for each home. So they see where the chimney has gone down. So those particular things, what is the condition of those things, they try to see. This is the second. And the third one, which is slightly complex, is the damage to the surrounding structure. Now damage can be anything. Damage may be, I can tell you, if there is even a small crack in my screen of the phone, I will say, oh my God, it's so huge. So how can we define damage? So they define damage grade. Now construction, as very first picture I have shown, that is completely destructed under the same earthquake because that was made up of masonry. The second structure doesn't collapse at all because that is made of RC. So if the construction material is different, the building damage is bound to be different. So vulnerability class they have also introduced, and they said, okay, I will say the EMS scale is one of the oldest scale, and till now it is followed. Why? I will tell you. After so many instrumentation, why we still follow the intensity scale, I will explain later. So they have given 12 scale, intensity scale, and from 1 to 12, if I go up, the intensity is increasing. So they have given, if intensity is 1, it is not felt. And you can see intensity 8 onwards, 8 to 12, it is actually have some damageability to the structures. Okay, intensity 8 is called heavily damaging, then 9 is destructive, 10 is very destructive, 11 is devastating, and 12 is completely devastating. So that's how they have given this scale. And based on this, 3 observation. One is on human being, second is on object, third is on damage to the surrounding buildings. Okay. And in the description box, they have actually given the 3 things I told you, they have given. And this is readily available on the internet. If you don't have, I can share with you this details. For quick reference, I will go to the damage 8 scale, intensity scale. It's damaging. The description itself says it's damaging. How damaging? Most people are frightened and try to run outside. Many find it difficult to stand, especially on upper floors, because acceleration increases as along the height. So at top floor, it accelerates very high or displays very high. So they could find very difficulty in upper floors to stand in it. Now the second point is observation. Furniture is shifted and top heavy furniture may be overturned. Okay. And third is C point is on damage on the buildings. So they have said many buildings of vulnerability class A suffers damage grade 3 and a few of damage grade 4. Okay. Now there are three things I couldn't understand. First, we want some number. What do you mean by many buildings? 100 buildings, many, maybe 80, 50? How do we quantify many buildings? This is one confusion. Then the vulnerability class, what does it mean? What is vulnerability class? And then third is damage grade 3 and few of damage grade 4. I didn't get. So three confusion is there. Let me go to the next slide to explain that. For this, they have classified vulnerability class starting from A to F. And you can see, I don't have to tell you, you yourself will tell me which one is the most vulnerable class. You can see the masonry buildings, whatever is the most probable is the circle, and the dotted with this is the range. So for rubble stone masonry, vulnerability class is A. Okay. And masonry buildings with reinforced or confined, it has vulnerability class most likely is D. Similarly, for steel structure, you can see the steel structure, it is vulnerability class E. So what do you think? What is the most vulnerable class? I think your audio is muted. Okay. So most vulnerable is A, and as we go from A to F, vulnerability decreases. Now I know you have a question. What is the vulnerability itself? I will tell you. So the vulnerability class decreases as we go from A to F. So this point that the vulnerability class A suffers damage grade 3 or 4. Vulnerability A class is done. What is damage grade 3 or 4? Here they have shown description with photographs. What does it mean? Damage grade 4 is very heavy damage, very heavy structural to very heavy non-structural damage. And you can also see this is for, I'm not able to see the top. Yeah, this is for masonry buildings. And similar, I don't think I have given. No, this is for masonry building. And similar chart with damage grade definition has been given for RC structure, wood structure, and steel structure. As we know, if the construction material changes, their damage pattern will also change. That's why they have given similar table for different construction material. So damage grade vulnerability class is known, damage grade is known. Now I am concerned about how do you classify or quantify many, few, most. This is given here. Few means it is 10 to 40%. Many means 40 to 60%. And most means 60 to 100%. It's all given in that description itself. So before going to the site after earthquake, we have to take one photocopy of this set and try to assign some seismic intensity zone. As we move out from the origin, radially go out, so the seismic intensity will actually reduce. Near the epicenter, it will be the highest intensity scale, probably 9, 8, and then it will generally follow the lower numbers. So is it clear how we are defining seismic hazard, then how we are trying to quantify it, and the one exception is that this intensity scale, which is based on our observation. Why do we rely today also? Because instrumentation can go wrong. It may have some disturbance, or probably under huge destruction, it may stop working. But this is, although has some subjectivity, but this is based on our own experience. So it has reliability much higher than those. Till date, we also rely on this too. Not all alone to this, but we combine this instrumentation along with this intensity measure. Okay, am I clear? The first component of the seismic risk is that quantification is done. Now I will talk about what is vulnerability, which I didn't talk. Okay, before going to vulnerability, because that is a lengthy thing, exposure is a smaller thing. Let me explain the exposure component. Because in the very beginning, I said seismic risk is a function of three things. Mathematical function or combination of three things, which is seismic hazard, seismic vulnerability, and exposure. Now, exposure is something used as a catalyst. It increases the seismic risk or decreases the seismic risk or accelerate, decelerate. How? Direct exposure is population. Let's say in Mumbai, some earthquake struck. What will happen? Because the population density is so high, the life loss will be very high, obviously. Right? So this is actually increasing my seismic risk. Okay. Now, the earthquake struck at some nuclear power plant, and although nuclear power plant shouldn't have any destructive thing, because they are designed to withstand that much of. But for any reason, gas pipeline, it broke out. What will happen? Larger number of deaths will be there, and there probably could be higher damage to the nearby structures. So it is also increasing my seismic risk. There could be some reason which can decrease also. So that is called direct exposure. There are indirect exposure too. Like I am making my house in a very posh colony of Delhi. Okay. So where the cost of this house is probably 1 crore. And why 1 crore? Probably because of the location first, and then it has all amenities, evacuation plan, and it is earthquake resistant design is there, and so many things. So if my affordability is there, I will build for, I would not like to die. So I would build safer house. So that's how also economy is related to the seismic risk. And similar way, employment and marketability, all those things. So clear, the third part of seismic risk is exposure. How it is infecting the seismic risk. And the most important thing is seismic vulnerability. Why I have kept it here? Because this is the only part where we have something to do to reduce the seismic risk. As we know, seismic hazard, we have no role. It's natural. Till it, neither we can predict nor stop seismic hazard. It will happen. And the exposure, we have very little to do. And it is very long-term process. If I have to reduce the population, you know, it's not easy task. How we can, land is limited. How we can reduce the population density? Then economic condition. Even if I can improve, but that will a very, very, very long process. So we have very little to do in exposure. But vulnerability is the thing where actually we can contribute. So first of all, what is seismic vulnerability? It's nothing. It's the susceptibility of ground shaking. Like it's like that. I have vitamin C deficiency, so I am prone to cough and cold. Very natural. But do I sneeze right now? No, because the environment is not like that. The weather is not like that, so that I can sneeze or cough. But during monsoon, I will be the first one to catch cold, because I have the lacuna, I have inherent deficiency of vitamin C. I am prone to cough and cold. So it's my problem. It's not, and the monsoon season is the seismic hazard, equivalent to the seismic hazard. If that seismic hazard occurs, my vulnerability is responding to the seismic hazard, and the end product is cough and cold, right? So you have to understand the seismic vulnerability and seismic hazard, they are independent things. Most often, my students mix them up and said they are interrelated. No, they are not. They are independent things. The vulnerability is only known when the conducive environment is there. That means when monsoon is there, then only you can know that I am prone to cough and cold. That's my vulnerability. Okay. So vulnerability, how do we quantify? So it is vulnerability. Now I want to know, how do we quantify? Because ultimately we need some numbers. So vulnerability is giving us the probability of damage due to a particular level of ground shaking. Okay, combining these two. So ground shaking can be anything, velocity, acceleration, or displacement. That any quantity can be represented for ground shaking, and damage is can be displacement also. Okay. Now there are mainly three types of assessment, vulnerability assessment. One is empirical, another is hybrid. In between I have kept hybrid, and another is analytical. Hybrid is the bridge between empirical and analytical. It's bridge between these two. Empirical is, as I said, it's based on our observation. In seismic intensity, we have seen that we go to the site after earthquake and try to assign some seismic intensity for each zone. And empirical formula is similar to that. And how do we represent? We represent it as damage probability matrix or a continuous function. Continuous function is in x-axis, it is the ground motion. Ground motion can be of acceleration, velocity, or displacement, ground displacement. And in y-axis, it is the probability of damage. Okay. So it is a continuous function for vulnerability functions, or damage probability matrix is a only identical isolated points. Like in a region, if the earthquake is of magnitude 6 or 7, I will not have damage of A, damage class A, which is the most vulnerable class, vulnerability class of steel structure. That is not possible. So I don't have every data, every damage data for every ground acceleration, right? So I will have only, and in that location probably we don't have wood structure, we don't have steel structure, only masonry or RC maybe there. So we have only two type of things. So that will result in some points, okay, that we will give in damage probability matrix. So it's clear, it's based on the damage that we observe after earthquake. It's the empirical method. And as I told you, empirical method can give us few data, not all. Not for all building types, all vulnerability class, and all ground motion. All data is not available. Okay, so how do we know? So we go for analytical. Analytically, we model a building and we increase the ground motion till it fails for every structure. And we found that this is the damage probability. If the acceleration is 0.2g, if acceleration is 0.5g, it collapses completely. So from analytical observation, we can have the continuous curves. But what is the reliability? As we know, whatever method we use for modeling the actual structure, the actual structure is actual structure. We cannot model each and everything. Whatever software, sophisticated software we use, it's not possible. So What is the reliability if we analytically model all these things? So there comes hybrid method. What we do, we model analytically, and whatever data is available in empirical method, we try to tally those. If they are closer, if they are matching, we are actually assured that whatever I modeled analytically, it's giving me with sufficient accuracy the result. Okay, that's how hybrid method is used in vulnerability. And as I said, while we are designing our structure, we can make it very without any lacuna, without any lack. I have vitamin C deficiency. I can take pills so that I can increase my immunity in vitamin C. So my vulnerability is reduced. And in monsoon during, I will not catch cough and cold, right? So vulnerability is the thing where we have lot to contribute, and I am very happy today to have so many learned person with me, and I don't want to waste this opportunity. So I will, before I talk about the seismic risk assessment, which is a method of course, but I would like to tell you something about modeling of infill frame buildings, because that is incorporated in 2016 edition of IS 1893, and there are a lot of confusion. As a structural engineer, as designer, as a proof checker, I encounter a lot of things, and it's not that designers don't want to do. Probably they are not convinced and they are not well informed how to do it. And if we don't do, what is the risk we are imposing on the final performance of the structure? So I would, before I talk about the seismic risk assessment, I would like to talk about modeling of infills. I think I am permitted. Okay. So before I start, I always ask myself whether it is worth to follow, do any task. Is it important to do? So here also I am following the same thing. Why do we model? If we don't do, what will happen? So my heading is effect of infills on performance of RC frame buildings. The very first is infills are, the unit density is around 20 to 22 kilonewton per meter cube. So it is very much near to reinforced concrete. So it is very heavy and at the same time stiff. So if we incorporate infill walls are nothing but brick, unreinforced brick masonry walls. Those are called infill walls. So infills, if we incorporate, so it is giving us very high stiffness, which is good. I am not taking into account high stiffness, but if it is adding of infill is giving me high stiffness, it's good only, very good. Now it has increased strength, and how strength can be increased? For this particular, the corner, left-hand corner plan and 4-story building, I have calculated that due to incorporation of infills, the strength of the bare frame increased 2.2 times. It's so high, and stiffness was 35 times. That is always good. I am not taking into my design that it can bear so much of load, and actually in practice it is taking higher load than my assumption. Then my design is very well conservative. Yes, very good. But at the same time, presence of infill actually increases the shear force in the adjacent column. Why this happens? To understand this, we have to go to this figure. When there was only vertical load, nothing is laterally shifted. There is no displacement, lateral displacement. So it's perfectly all right. But under lateral load, what happens? Infill has some different material property. RC has some different material property. So their load displacement curve will be different. Under the same load, they will deflect differently. we can see. So because of under the lateral load being very heavy and rigid, this infill panel, it has less deflection, and much flexible beam columns, they have deflected more. And there is a right hand corner, top corner, you can see that there is a separation between the infill panel and the adjacent beam column, right? Okay, fine. But when there is relative displacement, so this lateral force actually trying to push this infill diagonally. But every force has equal and opposite reaction. To remove that lateral pushing, what it happens, it applies a tension. Because of this diagonal tension, there is two components. One is vertical, which is going to the beam above as shear in the beam, and the horizontal direction of this diagonal force is going to the shear force at the column face. And that's why we can see many of the after earthquake survey, we can see in reinforced unreinforced masonry infill frame has failed because of the shear in the column, which is the most probable failure mode of the RC frame member because of presence of infills. Okay. So now I will talk about the, because of infill, what is the failure, probable failure mode of the surrounding RC frame. The very first one is shear failure of RC column, which I told you, because of this horizontal component of the diagonal force, which act as shear force to the column. So shear failure of the RC column, and it has been so prominent in each and every earthquake, even in our experiments in the lab. Everywhere it is very prominent that this column is going to have much higher shear force than it is anticipated from the design itself. Additional shear force, and that additional shear force is, if not taken care properly by providing stirrups, additional stirrups there, then column is going to have shear failure. Okay. The next is shear failure due to short column effect. What is short column? In the basement, to give entry of the light, what we keep the some top portion with only glass. We remove the infill panel, but lower portion, as we are using it as parking, the lower portion is with URM infills. Okay, so that even in bathroom, this is in Sumatra earthquake. I have taken this photographs. This is for bathroom. We do the same thing for lighting, and that causes a short column effect. In short column, what happens? The moment and shear are interrelated, right? So if we reduce the height, the
Yes, we can resume from the last slide.
yes. Am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes, you're audible. Yes.
I think we're here.
Okay. Okay, you can resume now. Yes.
Sorry, actually there was a power cut at my place. So we were talking about the failure, which is originated because of the presence of infill for the frame members. And the very first we talk about the shear failure of the columns because of this additional horizontal shear force caused by the diagonal reaction of the start member or infill members, right? Then shear failure due to short column effect. And I was talking about why short column in shear is higher. Bending moment and shear force are interconnected, right? So for the same moment, if I reduce the height of the column to half, then shear force increases 4 times for the same moment. Top and bottom moment 2m, right? And what is m? V into height of the column. If I reduce this height to half, then 2 into 2 it will be multiplied. So for the same moment, if I reduce the height of the column, shear force increases. And that's the cause, and we never encountered this, so this can be avoided. If we can, you can see the spacing of the column, stirrups column is quite high, because if we individually design the column, there is no shear force coming to it, so it's the nominal only for confinement of the concrete and to reduce the buckling of the main longitudinal reinforcement only. But additionally, there is shear force coming because of the short column effect. If we increase or decrease the spacing of the stirrups, we can avoid this failure. The measures are very, very small action, but if we understand properly, we can take care of this. Mostly this is not done because we don't appreciate the problem properly. So this is the second thing which are very prominent. And the third is flexural yielding of the column. You can see in the left hand thing, in the column there is a like someone has hammered the middle of the column. What happened in the shear? What happened in the bed joint, that is mortar and break, that is the weakest joint, and when lateral force is applying, this bed joint is pronounced to slide against each other. That means shear failure, bed joint shear failure is very prominent. So what will happen, this unit is going to hit the column and there is a yielding in the column. That's fine because of this hitting. So we have to take care of all this if we really want to reduce the seismic risk by reducing the seismic vulnerability of this RC frame buildings. Whatever I have shown is for uniformly infill frame buildings, but there are many things remaining. The story is half told only. Because of many constraints and space constraints mainly, nowadays we try to use the same buildings in many purposes. The first of all, we try to, in multi-story building, we don't have lateral space to expand, so we go vertically. But there is space, we require space for parking, we require space for small shops in our society also. So what we do, we keep the ground floor open like this. It's for car parking. It's very, very common photographs. Anywhere we can find this kind of buildings, right? But what happened in Bhuj earthquake, you can see all these, the right hand photographs, these two were identically mirrored apartments. But then the right hand side, the ground floor completely collapsed and gone down. The first floor I have shown with red arrow, the first floor has gone down to the ground floor, right? Because we have not designed properly, we just kept open. But because of this opening, as I said, the unit weight of infill is almost similar or nearby to the reinforced concrete, so it is very heavy. Its strength and stiffness both are heavy. If we are removing entirely for one floor, that is making it something vulnerable. There are two types of things which can happen. One is soft story, which is all about the stiffness differences between the adjacent stories. And another is weak story. Weak story is all about the strength deficiency between the top and bottom stories. Okay. So this is one of the thing, open ground story, that makes further complicated the complication of the infill frame building. Then there is mixed occupancy. What happened? This building photographs I have taken, this one from Dehradun, and this one is from Delhi. The first one you can see, at those time we used to have those calling phone call booths. So this one is this phone call booth, and the next is some medicine shop, small medicine shop, and the top floor is for residential purpose. And what happened, because of shop and all, we need some larger open space. We removed some of the columns, or partition we removed completely. But in the top floor, which is being used as residential, the arrangement of infills are completely different. So this mixed occupancy, and the right hand side photographs is of some go down. It is cement go down. Only the peripheral in the ground story where cement is being stored, only the peripheral infill was remaining. Internal partitions were removed completely. But in the top story, you can see it's quite a residential building. Mixed occupancy actually leads to very different type of performance under lateral load. I will show. And third one is torsion. On top of this is 2011 Sikkim earthquake. I have been there. And right hand side is, I have taken similar photographs from Peru earthquake, from some literature. What happened, you can see the right hand side, there was a staircase. Similarly, only the peripheral wall, even at the back, there was a staircase to go up. Staircase is very rigid. We know it acts like stud. And there is a very strong deficiency of the stiffness. And that resulted toppling of the whole building because of the torsion. So these are the things. Now, problem we have seen. That means actually we should take care of this, the small things that will reduce the vulnerabilities very, very considerably. What are those? I will talk about the IS code 1893 and 13920 specifically here, because in design offices, through what is the role of IS codes? IS code try to give the very complex, very simple solution of a complex problem, so that it is very easy to use in day-to-day life. Even we don't understand the nitty-gritty and detail of this long equation, but still we can incorporate that effect in our design and solution, right? And one of them is the capping on the time period. Okay, we know, all of us, we know, we use IS code, so that time period for bare frame, time period for steel bare frame, time period for RC structure with reinforced shear wall, time period for RC structure with infill wall. The time period formulas are different. Why they are different? They are empirical formulas. If we closely check our computer model, we will see that whatever sophistication we use, the time period what we get from the computer model is much higher than the provided in the code. And code said you cannot design your structure less than this base shear. Base shear, where from it comes? It comes from this time period. Based on this time period, we have to go to the design response spectrum and check what is the spectral acceleration. That means acceleration, which will actually determine the M into G, inertia force, that is encountered during the earthquake. How much? And that from there we get the base shear, right? The shape of the design response spectrum is such that After 0.4 second, if you increase the time period, your SA by G decreases exponentially. Since we encountered, and 0.4 second is roughly the time period of 4-story structure, and nowadays we mostly design more than 4-story structure only because of the lateral spanning is restricted. Okay, so we have to take care of this. Whatever my model is giving the time period, I have to correct my base shear for at least this time period. That means we have to jack up the base shear which I received from the computer model. I have to multiply this ratio to increase the base shear. I cannot change the time period of the model, but I can increase the base shear, at least design base shear, using this. So this is the very first point. And this is one way that is taking care of the minimum design base shear requirement. And why we have to trust the empirical formula of the code? Because that comes from experiments, real life experiments. And as I said, we cannot model the exact structure itself because of many things. We don't know the model of, we cannot model the damping. Damping is a very cumulative thing. It's friction with the main structure with the air. It's friction between the cracks, friction between the molecules of reinforced to reinforced, friction between the concrete to the steel. So it's collection of so much thing that we actually cannot model the damping. I'm giving just one example, and there are so many such examples. So that's why we have to follow this minimum design base shear criteria given by IS code. And modeling of infills, which was recently introduced in IS 1893-2016 edition, that talks, as I have shown you, under the lateral load, the infill is diagonally pressed, and as the same reaction, it tries to push it back and gives the tension, right? And this tension here is shown in the left figure. This figure I have taken from IS 1893. So IS 1893 says you model the infill as diagonal stud, concentric diagonal stud from node to node. Okay, and what will be the width of this diagonal and thickness of this diagonal? They have mentioned. This width in this figure you can is WDS, and the formula is given here. It's 0.175 alpha h to the power 0.4 LDS. And this lambda 1 has a long expression. This expression is nothing but it takes care of the relative stiffness of the frame member and the infill member. You can see that EME is the masonry infill members and EFE is the frame member. I column is the column stiffness, and T infill is it's the relative stiffness properties of the frame and infill. Okay, so we can use this. And what about, I have shown the 3D of this diagonal stud section, and what will be the thickness? The thickness will be the same as that of the original infill, provided this has no slender property. Do you remember while we have designed the columns, we check whether it is a slender column or not by checking whether this ratio is less than 12 or not. Similar 12 ratio has been given, that height to thickness and length to thickness should be less than 12. If it is true, then we can use the thickness same as that of the original infill wall. So it's pretty clear. And for your quick reference, you can check clause 7.9 IS 1893, which is on page number 25. And everything here is given. And the expected modulus of elasticity of infill has been related with the compressive strength of masonry prism. Masonry prism test is given in 1905, but they have replicated that formula in IS 1893. So we don't have to refer 1905 to. If I follow only 7.9 clause, my job is done. one thing actually is of question, that this infill walls are not solid. We have door window opening, but IS 1893 says you don't reduce the width of the diagonal stud even if there is a door and window. But many codes, including Euro codes and all, they suggest some kind of reduction in the width. But if we don't reduce that width, we are in the conservative, from the perspective of design, we are in the conservative side. That's why this is quite acceptable to me. Okay, this is some kind of example which I tried to solve to show that how easy it is to find out the diagonal width. Thickness is same that of the thickness of the original wall, and fit it in our analysis. Only this much of effort is required. Only this much of effort. Okay. There is another thing. It says in 2002 version of IS 1893, it says when you have open ground story, either you go for nonlinear dynamic analysis to actually know the difference between stiffness and strength on the story above and below. If you don't want to do that, because nonlinear dynamic analysis is difficult to perform in day-to-day life in design office, it's more of a research component. So they said another thing, that if you don't want to go for this nonlinear dynamic analysis, you can do one thing. The ground story, where is the open story? It may be on the ground floor, it may be on the first floor, whatever is the floor. But that floor, column and beams, you should design for 2.5 times higher design shear because of the earthquake. And then that is another story. I will talk about that someday later. Whether that will give us the performance that same as of the uniform infill building or not. But in 2016, that clause has been removed, and it has been entirely left to the designer that you have to check and assure that there is no irregularity of strength and stiffness. And how irregularities has been given, it is given in the table 6 of IS 1893. What is soft story, what is weak story, those irregularities should not be there, even if you are allowing the open ground story, without giving some prescribed thing which was already there in 2002. They have removed it. And this irregularity should be corrected in seismic zone 3, 4 and 5 without mentioning how we can correct those measures. So this is for the all about the code. Now I will show you something more than that. Here, these photographs I have taken at IIT Roorkee when I used to be a student there. This is the construction of one hostel. And in the red circle, you can see there is a gap between the beam top and the infill wall. It bound to happen. How do we construct? First, we construct the bare frame. Then we try to put the infill wall one by one brick layer, and then one mortar layer, then another brick layer, and so on. Whether it is the Flemish bond or Rie bond, doesn't matter, but we construct like that. And what we do at the top, if there is a small gap, we put some mortar to fill that gap. But in mortar, there is huge amount of water. With time, water evaporates, and there is a slight gap. Even if there is a slight gap, what will happen? The load cannot be transferred in air. For load transfer, we need to have some medium, right? So the beam, whatever is the load on the beam, cannot be directly transferred to the infill wall. So infill wall is actually acting as non-structural element here, because it is not taking part in load transfer mechanism of the entire structure, right? Am I audible? Okay. So transfer mechanism, and to find before this code has given this modeling guidelines of infills, I have studied one thing to find out what is the exact way of modeling, what is should be the realistic model which I can use in the design industry, because I am a designer, structural designer, so I would like to be as simple as we can use it in daily use, right? So I have taken 3 models, and I have taken eccentric model. You can see not concentric model, because it is not actually going corner to corner. Because of this construction sequence, there is a gap between the top beam and the infill panel itself. So it is actually at the beam column joint, near the beam column joint. So I have taken these 3 models and try to find out which model is the giving me the actually observed thing. I have taken some experiments results and try to simulate them using these 3 different models, 1 stud, 2 stud and 3 stud model. And surprisingly, if I model this using one eccentric stud, I can predict all the observed results which we got from experiments. And you can see here, because of this right hand side diagram, because of this diagonal horizontal component of the diagonal, this r cos theta, it is the extra force on the column. And I said, if I can provide the required stirrups for this extra r cos theta shear force, then my column is safe. Then how do I know what is the extra r cos theta? Cos theta I can find out. It's from the geometry of the panel itself. Theta is known. Now I have to know the R value. R value is the strength of the infill material. For my study, for my research, I have gone through the entire literature starting from 1958 till date, and it gave me 4 distinct failure modes. That means infill panel can fail in this 4 modes. Among them, sliding shear, which I told why yielding occurs at column because of the bed joint sliding of the infill panel, that is the most common failure mode. So we don't have to go there, we can find out, and that's why I have solved one example trying to find out the additional shear force the adjacent column experiences due to presence of infill panel. That means R cos theta component. And R I have taken, you can see the expected shear strength of masonry I have taken, and the shear strength I have taken VINE is equal to area of shear area and strength in shear. And you can use AC41 for that matter, but it's only if I can use this formula, that is enough. We don't have to do anything. I have to just check whether the shear reinforcement or the stirrups given in the column is capable to withstand this much of additional force or not. If we check only this, my column is safe. And we know if the column is safe, then the entire structure has very, very high performance in the same that way. And to show that, as we don't want to model the infill panels, what happens, what we actually getting instead of what we have to get. For that, I have taken this plan dimension. In the X direction, we have 9 columns, and in the Y direction, it's 4 columns. It's taken from a generic plan. And for a 4-story structure, I have performed the nonlinear analysis. And the pushover analysis is showing me that if I am using modeling the infill panel, then the top curve I am getting. And if I am not modeling them, so the bottom curves, the left hand side is for longitudinal direction. That means this 1 to 9 in this direction, x direction, and this right hand side curves are showing for transverse direction. You can see in both the diagrams, it is pretty clear that what we do in generally in the design office, how underestimate we calculate their strength, stiffness, and ductility. How the top curve, the left and right side curves are only the direction of lateral force has been changed from plus x to minus x. In the next figure, it is plus y and minus y, nothing else. The opposite mirror curves. The top curve is showing the, while we have modeled the infill along with its dead load. And the bottom curve is showing I have only considered the dead weight of the infill wall, but without modeling its action. Okay. The very first thing is, okay, when we are not modeling, as I said, my strength is quite lower. So in design, I have designed for lower strength, but my actual structure has much higher strength. So it's good, fine. The second thing, you can see the stiffness. Stiffness is the initial tangent of the force displacement curve, right? So it is very flat stiffness where we have actually modeled it as bare frame. It has very lower stiffness. So that is also in some positive from the point of view of the design. But you can see strength and stiffness lower I am calculating, and actual structure is higher, that is good. But what about the ductility? I am calculating the ductility very high in bare frame with respect to the actual infill frame. And in earthquake resistant design, we do rely much more on ductility rather than in force, because if we have to keep the structure elastic during the actual force, it will be very uneconomical and not required, because the damage in the structure actually increase the damping, which we want. We want the extra energy imparted by the earthquake should be dissipated as quick as possible so that my structure comes to rest, right? So we want damage, but in predefined area. We don't want damage in column, that will cause global failure of the structure, but we want damage in infills, non-structural elements, or even in beams. So, and how much we rely on the ductility from IS code, we can see how we calculate the base shear. Base shear is Z by 2 I by R SA by G into the seismic weight, right? This Z by 2 I by R SA by G is the horizontal acceleration component, which is multiplied with the seismic weight W, right? And if we take, this is SMRF structure. SMRF, for SMRF, the response reduction factor I by R, R is given as 5. If it is normal residential building even, then it is 1/10. So actually we are designing for 10% of the force and 90% we are relying on ductility. So if you are calculating higher ductility here and your structure is giving very much lower ductility, then every calculation, every assumption failed here, and our structure is bound to have collapsed. So we have to be careful. We need to model it so that we can actually see the actual picture that's going to happen. Although that is not the perfect, but with acceptable limit of agreement. That's what I wanted to discuss about this infill modeling. I would like to take up some questions if you have. Do you have any question? Hello. I'm not able to
So
hear you properly. Can you write somewhere?
someone has raised hand.
Yeah. Yes, please continue.
I
Pooja?
think we will wait if participant can ask the question.
I'm not. If Dr. Rajan can take up
Ma'am,
the.
one question is here. Can you read the question in the chat box?
Yeah, I got it right now.
One question came from Shushma Award. She want to ask how to increase the ductility of a structure.
We have to follow IS 13920 for that. That code is all about ductile detailing of the structure. Is your question answered?
Ma'am, another question just came. Can you see the question on the chat box?
How to model infill walls in ETABS, ma'am? Okay, the same thing. The same thing you have to model it as, you can take a beam element, but it is a stud element, so it has only axial action. You can release the moments at the both ends, and you can give the strength, limit the strength as this equal to its bed shear joint strength. Then your model is done.
There are some another questions also.
In response spectra curve, why 5% damping are to be considered? Okay, in 2002 version, there was another table 3, which talk about different damping. 5% damping is taken for RC structure. RC structure is very normal in India. That's why they have given for 5% damping. And if you have some other structure like masonry structure, which has generally 10% of damping, if damping is higher, then the force imparted or by the earthquake quickly dissipated. So the base shear will be reduced. That's why we have to use table 3, which talk about you have to multiply the xi factor as 0.8. So the now VB for masonry structure as per IS 1893 2002 version will be 0.8 times of VB for a concrete structure. And if for steel structure has very low damping, so it will suffer much higher force, like 1.2 times. We have the base shear for concrete and base shear for same steel structure will be 1.2 times of base shear of concrete structure. But in
there are some questions I sent you. Please read your chat box.
In 2016 version, this has been removed, and it has been asked to us that we have to consider damping 5% for any kind of structure. But the steel industry people, they are still not relying for their industrial structure. They are taking that 1.2 multiplier factor or 1.2 or 1.4 multiplier factor till now. How to prevent beam column joint from yielding during seismic loading and poor workmanship in RCC building construction. Okay, beam column joint, IS 13920 specifically talks about beam column joint reinforcement. If we follow that, it will not yield. It will not yield. And I have not shown here, if I can show, let me. Yes. Can you see that? This two left side is for beam column joint of bare frame, where the V joint is the compression and tension of the reinforcement minus VC. Okay. when I am incorporating this infill, the joint shear actually reduces r cos theta amount. So when we are actually incorporating infill, that reduces the joint shear, but increases the shear in the column itself. That's why whatever we see post earthquake damage survey, that we see that failure is because of the column shear failure, not of the beam column joint failure. And if we follow 13920 clauses, it's perfectly all right. Okay, ma'am, why zone factor was taking Z by 2? Okay, Z by 2, if from conceptual perspective, the load factor 1.5 and the zone factor together actually representing the maximum considered earthquake, which is the theoretical upper limit of the earthquake possible. And its written period is 2,500 years. That is the theoretical highest considered earthquake. So this Z along with the load factor of 1.5 actually representing the seismicity acceleration at that particular location. But if my structure is regular, I'm not designing any silo bunkers or for nuclear wastage or probably some nuclear power plant, some very important structure, we generally design for design basis earthquake, which is has a return period of 456 years, right? So the relationship between MC and DB is half of MC. So Z by 2, that's why, because we are designing for design basis earthquake, not for maximum considered earthquake. From that perspective, we are using Z by 2. But if you think that I want to design my structure for the maximum possible earthquake, then you remove these two. You design it for Z. Okay. How to minimize torsional effect? Okay, what is torsion? Torsion is nothing but the relative displacement between the two corners. IS 1893 says if the ratio of the maximum displacement, it happens because, let me show that. It happens because of this twisting effect, right? Twisting, why this twisting effect occurs? This twisting effect occurs when the application of load and reaction from the floor has some eccentricity. So it actually acting as a couple. So there is a rotating moment. So what I have to do? I have to bring them together. So there is no eccentricity between the action of load, earthquake load, and the resistance from the floor, first of all. And secondly, even if there is something, we have to limit this at 1.2 ratio. Then it's okay. The main thing is we have to select the mass and we have to select the stiffness. That's why in multi-story structure you can see if the column is rectangular, it's not like this and this, like this. So one row they go like this, and in the next row they put it like this, so that the stiffness in one direction is equivalent. Like in this case, what will be the D? D will be the this longer side. BD cubed by 12, that is the inertia, right, for a rectangular section. So when I'm placing this and force is like this, what will be my D? My D will be this longer side, BD cubed by 12. But if I am placing this like and I'm pushing this, so my D reduces to this. That's why we staggered in each column line, we staggered like this. One column is like this, in the next row is this, then next row is this, and so on. So we have to place the stiffness in equal manner, and I'm not allowed to keep a library without planning a corner of my house. If I have to do that, I really have to plan it beforehand, right? So if we can follow this rule, torsion will not be there. How high-rise buildings are made quake resistant. It can withstand how much high intensity earthquake. It depends on how we want to want it to defend. I can design it for as much high force as we can, and the rest of the thing we can take it from the ductility. The beauty of earthquake resistant design is it's not only about force, it's force and ductility. And as I said, for SMRF structure, we are only 10% designing for the force, and the 90% we rely on the ductility of the structure. So we need to increase ductility, and for very high-rise structure, we actually provide some dampers so that the damping can be increased, so that the response can be restricted with the acceptable limit. That also can be done, but that is for very high-rise structure. But normal rise structure is this theory works well. If angles of excitation will be changed, it will affect on structural stability. Yes. For that, let me explain like that. Probably this question raised because I have taken one at a time. Excitation in X direction, in the next excitation in Y direction. And your question is, it can be anything. It can from any angle, right? But if our structure is orthogonal, what is orthogonal? That means it has a 90-degree, dot product is 0, like that. Then we can actually dissociate this two component or any component in one direction at a time, another direction at a time. But if it is non-orthogonal structure, then we have to combine both the direction of the structure together. In that case, if it is main component is for x-axis, then complete x-axis, then 30% of the y-axis, and square root of that. It is given in the IS 1893 part 1, very first 7-8 page probably. The load combination, the rate has been given. Am I clear? Recently, I have modeled a flat slab structure and a traditional beam slab structure instead without infills. When I have done seismic analysis, the flat slab structure had larger forces when compared to traditional beam slab structure. Why is it so? I have to check your model and then tell you. I don't have readily available answer for this because there could be many reasons for that. If you are actually interested, you can contact me through email, and I will look at your structure and I will try to explain why it is happening. What should be the displacement limit in case of earthquake? Displacement limit in case of earthquake has no meaning. I have a gas pipeline. My gas comes through pipeline. It's not cylinder, okay? And the material they use, it has a very low displacement capacity. So if I design my structure to remain go in much, but my columns can actually go, let's say 0.04 times height of the column allowed, but the gas pipeline cannot take that much of ductility or that much of displacement. So what will happen? Under the excitation, there will be breakage of my gas line. Even if there is nothing in my structure, but the secondary effect, fire, that will cause damage to my structure. So we have to take care of the structural as well as non-structural component of the building, intended building. For hospital buildings, let's say, hospital buildings, the cost of non-structural element or the equipment is much more than the structural thing. So there I have to actually take care of the minimum displacement, allowable displacement for the instrument. So it will depend for what I am designing for, what I want from my structure. So everything will depend upon that, and that requirement will be decided by the owner, by the architect, by the structural designer together, and then there is role of the structural designer to satisfy them structurally. What are the different type of vibration in structure due to earthquake? Different type of vibration, I couldn't get your point. It could be translation, it could be rotational, anything. And it will depend whether rotational or torsional will happen or not, depending upon your center of mass and center of gravity. Can you explain how buildings behave like a simple pendulum, which is dangerous for earthquake? Okay, a building can be considered as a pendulum only in case of singularity of freedom. But our structures, frame structure, our frame. Okay, our frame structure has 2D structure has at least 3 degrees of freedom. One is in horizontal, one is in vertical, another is in plane rotation. That is, we cannot consider it as a single degree of freedom at a time. Okay. After an RC frame construction, infill walls erected in actual practice. Is it fair for earthquake? See, we cannot change the construction practice. It is practice everywhere world over. It has been practiced. We can do one thing. Either we can completely flip the fill wall along with the beams on it, or we can create a gap outside. We can associate or we can dissociate. These are the two possibilities to overcome the damage or limit the damage because of this collision. Why are we taking Z/2 not Z? I think I have already explained that. Lokesh, which method is more suitable for earthquake building? See, I have. If you are not talking, can you please mute yourself, please? Okay, which method? The best replication of earthquake will be a non-linear dynamic analysis. But we have to see whether we need to put that much of energy, time, and expertise for each. If not, we can, for a regular structure, non-linear static analysis or pushover analysis. Why do you go for non-linear dynamic analysis? It's the adjustment between requirement and acceptance, accepted result. It's the combination between these two. But yes, if you ask me frankly, the nonlinear dynamic analysis is the best suited one. But that requires much, and it requires huge expertise to predict the result, the huge result we got from this analysis. But a good approximation, if there is no irregularity in my structure, it's regular structure, then a very good approximation is pushover analysis, which is nonlinear static analysis. As I said, there is no such limit, universal limit for anything. We have to select that limit based on the usage of the structure. Like hospital buildings, I said it will be the non-structural component will dominate the displacement, but for regular structure, it's structural component. What is the effect of large opening in wall on stability and resonance in the model? If there is a large opening and a very small thin slice of wall, then there will be stress concentration. So the corner, opening corner, will have diagonal cracks, very severe diagonal cracks that can propagate into your columns and beams too. But at the same time, if there is a guideline, if the opening is more than 50% of the wall, then the diagonal stud which we are modeling, you can take it 0. There is no stiffness. What could be the minimum multiplication factor for designing the soft story? I'm sorry, in 2016 model, they have removed that clause, but in 2002, you can check that it is 2.5 times higher the forces for earthquake. Only in the beams and columns of the story, which has been kept open. In 2016, they have not kept that clause, only said that if you are not allowed to keep this irregularity in seismic zone 3, 4, and 5. But how you will remove? They are more. What are the different type of vibration in structure due to earthquake? I think I have answered those questions. Okay, can you share your thoughts on eccentricity between center of mass and center of rigidity, and how can we eliminate that eccentricity? Also, if we cannot eliminate, then what design measure must be adopted? How we can minimize, I have already discussed. And if we cannot minimize, then what we can do? We can do those couple moment, the extra moment. I have to design for that. And in your analytical model, computer model, it's very easy to apply that. You can, if this is your building and there is a gap between these two, center of mass and center of rigidity. So multiplying this gap with this, that will create the moment. Okay, so what we can do, we can derive that moment, write that moment, m is equal to b into some force F. Okay, and that force you calculate and then apply in your model that floor, apply one in this direction, applying in this, and another in this direction. That will give you the rotational moment. So easy to model in your computer model. Okay, can you, I lost track of all these questions.
So there may be many questions, ma'am,
Okay.
from the audience, because the
I think we don't have time left for any question anymore.
yes, you have given answers to many of the questions. So shall we conclude now?
Yeah, I think.
Yes, I will send your mail ID to our participant.
You can write to me actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my.
Okay.
But phone number, most of the time you will not get me. So forget about the phone numbers. We hardly get time to sit in my office.
We will share your mail ID then, ma'am.
Yeah.
We will share your mail ID to all participants,
Yeah.
so they can put you a mail and then can ask you the queries.
Okay. Okay, another interesting question. I would like to answer this.
Okay.
Is earthquake can be predicted as we do in other disaster? I'm sorry, but till that, neither we can predict nor we can stop earthquake. So we can only contribute in vulnerability to reduce the seismic risk.
So shall we conclude now, ma'am?
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. So I am very thankful to Professor Putul Haldar from IIT Ropar, and ma'am has given a very nice and interactive session. The presentation was having the much content, the practical aspect regarding the earthquake analysis, and some numerical examples were also put by you, so that we should understand how to calculate the effective forces and the width of that effective section of the stud. So I think you have covered the seismic vulnerability, its aspect, and the risk assessment for the infill frame building, and how to model the infill with the help of the diagonal stud. That is also covered by you, and the damaging, then intensity, how to measure the intensity, what are the limits, then class A to class B, class C, class D, all with the intensity of 1 to 12 you have shown previously. And then the assessment approaches for the vulnerability you have given. Those were for the empirical method, then damage probability method, and using the vulnerability functions. Those you have explained very nicely. Then you have again given the effect of the infills on the performance of the RC frames, and then what are the effect of the infills on the failure of RC frames, that also you covered. And then the shear failure you also shown with the help of the diagrams, where the failure were at the corners and at the junctions for the beam and column, that you shown. Then effect of the irregular placement of infill on RC frame, that you also shown. The provision for the URM infill, and then the RC frames with respect to BIS, that is 2016, and Eurocode 8 also you mentioned for it. The realistic model you shown for the infill, and the strut model for the infill you have shown us. So you have covered the many aspects regarding the seismic vulnerability and risk assessment for the infill frame building. And our participants are also very enthusiastic. They have asked so many questions to you regarding this topic, because many of our participants are working as a faculty in some of the engineering college, and most of the faculties are the doctorate also. I think 30% faculties are doctorate, and they are working as a guide.
So that we can reach to every corner.
Yes, yes.
And we can actually contribute in reducing the seismic risk.
Yes.
I'm really
Because today I think some 400 people attended this session.
Oh, that's
and
great.
all 400 are from the engineering institutes.
I'm very
So
glad.
it is our pleasure also that you joined us and you share your thoughts and your work with us,
All
because
good.
we get very less opportunities to share the work.
Yes, yes.
So it was very niceful for us also. And as told by you yesterday also, so this is our FDP, which we organize with Karad and Nagpur in collaboration with. And all our resource persons are from very reputed institutes. And each and every person has given very nice presentation with basic concept to the advances and advanced topics in this civil engineering. So we will also again plan one of the FDP with your institute, that is with IIT Ropar in future, and then we will again be in contact with these participants. So finally, I'm very thankful to you for having a time with us. So we will now conclude your session. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I get those questions on the chat box?
I will pardon you all the questions.
Okay.
We will copy all the questions from the chat box and we will forward to you.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And one message to the participants. Tomorrow we will start the session at the 10 a.m. So tomorrow we are having the session of Professor Chaudhary sir. So we will sharply start it at 10 a.m. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. So now we will get log out then and we will end this session.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.